want to fend for myself, and I want to build people up for them to fend for themselves. Welcome, everybody. I am Clark Fredericks, and this is the Free Like Me podcast. Today's guest is Mischel. She's a wife, a mother, an advocate, and a sexual abuse survivor. I brought her on to tell her story of abuse, her story of healing, and I want everybody to learn the tools that Mischel has used, that I have used, that others have used to take their life in a new direction. Mischel, welcome, my dear.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity.
I'm thrilled by this. Mischel, everybody, just so you know, is one of my Facebook followers, and she has been replying to almost every single one of my posts, and she's been saying, Clark, you have to do a podcast, and I'm going to be your first guest. She planted that seed in my head, and when I finally reached out to her and talked to her and heard her story, I was blown away by it, and I said, this is my first guest. So
such an honor. I'm so thankful.
I'm thrilled to have you here.
First time I ever saw you was a time when I was struggling in my life with the demons. I told you today when I met you that I went through my whole life feeling like I was walking barefoot on broken glass. Didn't matter what job I had, didn't matter how good I looked, didn't matter what car I drove, didn't matter. I still had this overwhelming sense of just sadness. And I want to be free of that. I want to be free of that sadness. And all of the studying that I've done, all the research that I've done, I found that a lot of sexual abuse victims, children, carry that their whole life. And for me, in my situation, it was always stuff that was swept under the carpet and we weren't allowed to talk about. You have given us a platform where we can talk openly and be safe and feel safe there. And I can't thank you enough for that.
Yeah, I think because I'm so outspoken, I'm vulnerable. I'm a male, who had male on male, sexual abuse. And people respond to that and they trust me and they feel comfortable opening up. And I think that's why you're here.
Yep, absolutely true.
So tell me where, everything in our childhood carries over into our adulthood.
Absolutely.
Just take me back to like where you grew up, the era you grew up.
I grew up in upstate New York. Okay. I was born in the 60s. And I happened to be the child of my mother and father who abandoned me when I was younger. My mom had an affair with my dad, so I didn't have my dad present in my life. I think I read somewhere that, children who are born in single-parent households are 9 times greater to be sexual abuse victims. And I was that kid. So I lived with my grandparents, lived with my mom, and then she ended up meeting this fella, married him, and I was 6 years old. And my life was great until that man came into my life. And I don't know if you've ever met anybody and you get a sense about them, like you get a feeling. I remember meeting him and getting this feeling about him that I can't explain. Even
at 6, you could get that feeling.
Yes, I did. And there's something about him that just made me uneasy. And then he wasn't my first person who had sexually abused me. That person was actually his father. After my mom married Al, her husband, we went to Ogdensburg, New York, which is where he was from. And we went to meet his family. We were staying there because our apartment, we were going to be living there. We were moving there. Our apartment wasn't ready yet, so we were spending the night there with his family. And within 3 hours of me being in that household, Al's dad, George, had me in a room molesting me. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I got up to go to the bathroom. I was 6 years old, and I walked down the hall. The hall light was on. And as I started to walk toward the bathroom, the hall light went out. And my grandmother always taught me, if you can't see, you run your hands across the wall feeling for the switch or whatever. And I was doing that. And then all of a sudden, my arm went through like this black hole, and I felt 2 hands grab my wrists and pull me in, and the door slammed. Within seconds, he had me on his lap, just groping my body. I was a little 6-year-old girl in her pajamas. Mm-hmm. I had like these, they used to call them baby doll pajamas. Like they had little panties that had ruffles on the back and a little shirt that had ruffles on the front. And he had his hand across my mouth, and he was whispering into my right ear to relax because I was going to like this. And I remember my heart pounding. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. I remember looking around the room and thinking, how am I going to get out of here? Why is he doing this? And I remember focusing out the window because we were on the second floor of the house. There was a Dairy Queen, and we had gone to Dairy Queen earlier that day, and I saw the sign spinning around. I still haven't walked into a Dairy Queen to this day. And he started groping me, and within seconds, am I allowed to say exactly what he was doing? Or is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because it's pretty vulgar.
Yeah.
So the next thing I knew, he had his right hand across my mouth, and his left hand was in the pajama bottoms and in my vagina. His fingers were actually there. And obviously, no one had ever done that to me before, and obviously, it was very uncomfortable. And I remember, and I swear to you, I feel like it was God saying to me, you have to get out of here. You have to get out of here. And I remember looking around the room thinking of ways to get out of there. And I'm squirming the whole time, and he's holding me as tight as can be. And I can smell alcohol on his breath, and I can smell cigarettes on his breath, and I can smell his BO. And he had on a wife beater shirt. And I remember that voice telling me, take your leg as hard as you can and kick that table, because sat right in front of us was this metal TV table, and on it was his cigarettes. There was a cigarette lit, burning, his Black Label beer. There used to be this Black Label beer, it was called. And he had the TV going. And I took my right foot as far back as I could, and I wound up and I kicked that table, and it went flying across the room. And you heard the thud. And then you heard everybody downstairs go, what the hell was that? Because they were all downstairs playing cards. And then I could hear them running up the back stairs. And George opened the door and threw me to the floor. And I hit the floor like on all fours, and it knocked the wind out of me. The light came on in the hallway, and running down the hall was his wife, my mother, and her husband. My mother acted like she was embarrassed of me. I said immediately, George touched me. George touched my private parts. And his wife was beating on the door, calling him every foul name that you could think of. And I knew instantaneously he'd done that before.
Right.
What he had done to me, he had done before. And I remember my mother and her husband, Al, pulling me into the room that they were staying in, slamming the door. And I was told to stop crying. Stop crying. Stop crying right now. And I couldn't understand. Why were you I'm telling you I got hurt. I'm telling you what he did. Why are you? And suddenly I became the bad person. He would never do that to you. Don't you ever talk about my father like that again. And I remember my mother's husband, my friends and I always have a nickname for him. His birth name was Al, but I always called him Lurch because he reminded me of Lurch from the Addams Family. But I remember he came over with his fist in front of my face and said, I was never to speak of that again. And if I did, I was going to get that. And
this is in front of your mother.
In front of my mother. Right. And I remember looking over at my mother thinking, do something. Like, do something. And I just remember looking at her, wiping the tears from my face. And I go, and she goes, you heard your father. And he wasn't my father. I remember walking out of that room, and in that instant, the trajectory of my life changed forever. Because the subliminal message that was sent to me was, you don't matter. What happened to you doesn't matter. Don't ever speak of that again. Go live your life. Well, that's great to say, but I carried that with me my entire life. And
up to this point, before your mother married Al, had she been a loving, protective mother? Can you recall 5?
No,
going into 6?
I have very few fond memories, even with my mom. I don't know what her deal is.
But this just took it to a different level.
This took it to a whole nother level. No,
okay.
My fondest memories of childhood are with my grandmother, who ended up getting custody of me and my sister, and we'll talk about that later. No, I don't. I can't honestly say that. No,
okay.
No. But I think every child thinks they're going to be protected by their mother, and I surely did, and that didn't happen. So then we moved into our apartment, and the physical abuse started, like the constant beatings, and he used to pull us out of our, and I think this was also a way to send messages to us. We would be sound asleep, and he'd pull us out of the bed, throw us to the floor in a kneeling position, and you'd be half asleep, and your eyes would be like just fluttering because you're still half asleep. and you would hear him pull his belt out of his pants. You could hear the belt buckle jingling, and he would just start beating you with the belt. And I remember saying, what are you doing? I didn't do anything. I was sleeping. And he'd say, that's in case you do anything wrong during the day. That's a taste of what you're going to get later. And so that always...
Was he a drinker?
Oh, he was an alcoholic. Okay. Terrible, terrible. And so I learned to, or I was conditioned to, never say anything. And we were also conditioned to and learned to, and we were told this daily, you are never to speak about what goes on in this house to anyone. Anyone. And if the truant officers were called because she would keep us home from school to clean her house while she slept, or if anything was going on, we had to sit there with our hands folded at the table when the police were called by neighbors, because the police were called by neighbors repeatedly about the abuse I'm sure they saw in our neighborhood. And we were to rehearse what we would say. You know, no, nothing happened like that. No, we're good. No, we're happy here. We love mommy and daddy. And it just kept getting worse and worse with the physical abuse. I had no memory at all of the sexual abuse that took place with Al until decades later. I was facing a third open heart surgery, and it all came to light then.
Now, you said he would pull us out of bed.
My sister and I.
So you had a younger sister?
I have a younger sister, 3 years younger, yep.
And did you recall, did your memories of anything happening to her?
All the time, yes.
Did that also happen, come back to you after the surgery, or could you
I recall that without question, and I remember that my whole life. That wasn't something I blocked out. I remember walking in on him molesting my 3-year-old sister when I was 6 years old. Multiple times walking in on him with his pants down, forcing my 3-year-old sister to have oral sex on him.
3 years old.
3 years old. I can still see her with her curly, dark hair, sobbing. One thing that sticks up very clearly in my mind, my mother and I had gone, I was in first grade, I had won an award, and we went to this together, and she left my sister home. And I remember my sister coming to the door, pleading with us to take her. Don't leave me here. She's saying, I want to go with you, I want to go with you. And my mother said, no, my mother left her there, right? And I kept saying, "What? She can go, let her go." And she's like, no, she's staying here. When we came back after me going to get this award, right when we got to the door of the house, my mother said, take your shoes off. I said, take my shoes off? She goes, yeah, take your shoes off and your stocking feet. And we both had our shoes in our hands, and we tiptoed down the hall and walked into the house, and she kept telling me to shush, to be quiet. And as soon as we got in the house, I could hear my sister crying. And it was the kind of cry that was gut-wrenching. It wasn't like, you know, like a little boo-hoo. It was like when a little kid cries and they go, like they can't even catch their breath. They're crying so hard. I remember this. And we walked into the doorway. And as we walked in, there he was molesting her. Same thing, forcing her. And she was gagging. She was gagging terrible. And
getting oral sex from a 3-year-old.
Yes.
And your mother is with you.
Yes.
In the doorway.
And she's standing right next to me. And I remember.
And what happened?
I remember looking at my sister, looking at Al, and looking at my mother like, do something. And as soon as he heard us, he zipped up his pants and took off the front door, right out to the front porch. And she acted like nothing had happened. My sister got up off the couch and ran to my mother with tears down her face beat red, and said, "Mama," like she just wanted to be comforted. My mother backhands her. My mother backhands her to the floor. And my sister just throws up all over herself. And my mother looks over at me and says, "Get her in the bathroom and clean her up." I take her to the bathroom and I clean her up. And I can't make sense of any of this. Remember, I'm 6 years old.
Oh, let's just, I got to pause a second on that. I mean, how does a mother, a 6-year-old is bad enough, but a 3-year-old is so tiny.
Clark,
to be giving a grown man oral sex, and the mother doesn't
acknowledge it.
I mean, whether she was abused or not as a child, how do you witness that as a human being?
I have gone over and over and over in my head about this, because I will tell you, I have a daughter and I have a grandchild and a grandson and a granddaughter. And I will tell you right now, if I ever knew that anybody did those things to her, my daughter, or to my grandchildren, I would be in prison. I would do very serious harm to someone, and I would gladly go to jail for it. My life would be over in the free world, I have no problem with that. That's how passionate I am about this, and what it did to me mentally, emotionally, physically, because I became anorexic when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And now I look back on it, all these things that were going on in my life that I could make no sense of, I can directly relate all the way back to the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse I suffered as a child. And it wasn't until literally probably 8 years ago that I realized it was trauma, that it was actual trauma that I had suffered. I just figured I went on with my life, and I was always an overachiever, and I did well in life, but it was still there. It was still there like a heavy weight, and the gravity of it just became too great to carry. And the thing for me, and the biggest reason why I wanted to do this, is because I'm not alone. My story is not uncommon. It's bad, it's gruesome, it's whatever. But there are many survivors of sexual abuse that are not talking about it.
Well, we all think
we're the only ones.
We're the only case.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I thought I was the only case. And then until I spoke out, and like just the influx of people, me too.
Yeah,
yep,
yeah.
Me too. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, there is so much stigma and shame that comes with it that's on the victim. And these perpetrators walk away scot-free.
That's the
just
thing
like that.
That's the thing that kills me. We're stuck with the mountain of problems, the shame, the guilt. And you can't tell me if these predators really felt shame, the suicide rate among them would be sky high. And yet the suicide rate among the victims is sky high.
It's very high.
When do you ever hear of a pedophile committing suicide? They don't. In their mind, they've justified it somehow.
Yes. So I do remember constantly walking in on him molesting my sister over the years. He's someone that if you were at the counter, like making a sandwich, he would come up behind you and rub himself on you. He would do and say the most disgusting, vulgar things. He constantly had his hands in his pants, and he would say things to you like, guess what I got in my hand, and you can have it. And he just was so just repulsive in every level. And the abuse went not just sexually with my sister. I watched him beat the shit out of her too. My sister had a problem with, wetting her pants as a little kid, and we always used to tease her about it. But now looking back on it, I think it was trauma. I think she wet her pants very often and wet the bed very often because she was so horribly tormented by this man. And
so you mentioned you became anorexic in your teen years.
Yes, in my late.
Did you go down like any other dark roads?
Addictions. I'll be honest with you. I started smoking pot when I was 13 years old. I started smoking weed with a neighborhood kid, and because I have a genetic disorder that affects my autonomic nervous system, and I'm a heart patient. It affected me in a different way. I don't metabolize drugs and alcohol like a normal person. So. And I feel like that was a blessing from God, because I will tell you, if it were not for those two conditions that I have, I could easily have become a drug addict or an alcoholic to numb those terrible, painful feelings that I had on every waking moment of my life. I can look back on my life and see how my first marriage was a catastrophe and failed miserably, no doubt, because I had so many triggers. I had terrible, terrible anger issues. Terrible. Would fly off the handle at the drop of a hat. And the other thing is, I think the conversations I was having with myself were really unhealthy. I guess I convinced myself, I think a lot of victims do this, that there must be something innately wrong with you, that this happened to you, and I remember, just the whole secret thing, like keeping the secrets from my mother. They're a family of secrets, and all secrets do is keep you sick. I don't want to keep anybody's secrets anymore, and that's why I'm here today. I feel like me speaking out about this publicly for the first time in my life is going to set me free in a way that I've never been free before. I mean, I've told my close friends. I've discussed it with you. I've told my aunt who passed away. I told my daughter, and I told my husband. That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
So this is a big step for you.
It's a huge step for me.
And this is what you have to do, though. You know, first you start with somebody you totally trust.
Yes.
And then another one. And then another one. And each time, have you noticed that each time you've talked about it, it's gotten a little easier and a little easier, and the hold it has on you lessens a little slightly?
But I will tell you, after becoming part of your community, the Clark Fredericks Free Like Me community, I was able to talk about it, but not without crying. Not without crying, not without getting choked up, not without feeling sick to my stomach, not without feeling anger, until I became part of this community and started to follow you, and you started doing your morning minutes with you, like your little videos every morning of encouragement. And the more I saw you speak and how freely you spoke, it resonated in me in a way where, like, hey, I want that. I want to be able to do that too. And since I made the decision to do this with you, I feel like I stand up taller. I feel like that cloud that hung over my head literally for 60 years of my life is gone. And I've been waiting for this feeling my whole life. I felt like I couldn't even sleep last night. I felt like the little kid waiting for Santa Claus to show up. I couldn't wait to get here and to be free of this stuff.
Right.
And I know that there's other people out there. Just since I made this decision and shared it with a few people, I've had people reach out to me and say, oh my gosh, I saw your post and this is what happened to me. And it's people I've known my whole life. I met a woman who was 70 years old who reached out to me, who's never told anyone. She never told her children. She never told her husband, nothing. And knowing that I'm doing this, I feel like she's with me today. I feel like in spirit she's with me. And all those people that reached out to me, I told them, like, I've taken all of your prayers with me and all your thoughts and well wishes with me. And every one of you sits right here behind me. And I feel like God sat in the seat next to me in the car ride on the way here today. Because I really think that God was in this all the way for me. I think God put you on my TV screen that day when I saw you on the Tamron Hall show. I feel like God connects you with people for a greater purpose. And this was the purpose. And I'm just happy to be here.
So you go through life, anorexic, a horrible first marriage. Did you go to college?
I didn't. I got married very young. I got married when I was 18, had my daughter when I was 19. And no, I didn't. But I used to hang out with all my friends who were in college. That was one of the things I did. I was telling your girlfriend, Lisa, when I met her this morning, I was constantly going to bars with friends. Even though I didn't drink, I was always the designated driver, which I loved. And I got to live life vicariously through them because I got to hear all about their college and whatever. And I actually went to trade school when I became a cosmetologist.
Okay. Now, you're not necessarily tormented by your abuse because your mind had shut it out.
Exactly. I knew something wasn't right. Always something didn't feel right. Something felt off kilter my entire life.
Were you racked with anxiety throughout your life?
Terrible. And
depression?
It was more
anxiety?
Yes, yeah. Definitely anxiety. And then just went about my life. And then had some really bad relationships, abusive relationships. Hung out with some really terrible people that
you know, there's a vibrational chart, and at the bottom, if you're at the bottom of the vibrational chart, you can't, attract somebody who's at the top of the vibrational chart. You're gonna attract what you're giving out. Right. So even though you're not, your abuse isn't in the forefront of your mind, you're damaged in ways you don't even realize.
Oh, yes.
And you're attracting damage.
Yes. And I never realized how damaged I was until I healed.
Right.
I never realized how really messed up I was until I got on that journey of healing. And it was after a couple of really bad relationships where, I dated a guy that was extremely abusive. I opened up to him about my child abuse, and he turned it like right around on me like a double-edged sword and said, because he just had his own issues, and he would say things like, well, no wonder your parents abused you. You're an idiot. And right. Yeah. And so it made me not want to feel safe with anyone to share my truth with. The one person that, and another person I think that God sent me is my husband, John. He has prayed me through everything. When I was having these fits of rage early on in our marriage, I'll give you an example. I came home, dirty dish in the sink that my daughter had left there, and I had this fit of rage about a dirty dish in the sink. And my incredibly loving husband comes over to me, grabs me by the hands, kisses me on the forehead, and says, whatever's eating at you is not about that dirty dish in the sink. Whatever it is, you got to get to the bottom of it and the core of it and heal it. Because all I want to do is be happy and I want to love you. And we can't do that with this anger. And I
love that guy.
Oh my God, I love him too.
Yeah.
I love him so much. And he's carried me through my 3 heart surgeries. So, I mean, he has prayed me through everything. So
because you didn't recall your abuse, did you have a relationship with God throughout your life?
My relationship...
Because usually it's a soul killer. It kills your faith.
Yeah. When I ended that relationship with the abusive boyfriend, I dove into religion head first. I became a Christian, where they dunk you in the water and everything. And my life changed for the better. My life changed for the better the day that I accepted Jesus into my heart and into my life. That probably was the beginning of my healing journey. And
I got baptized also. And, and I get people who they've had stuff done to them and it just kills your faith. And then they just can't have anything to do with God. And I get it. And I went through life like that. But what I say is, I was filled with ugliness inside, darkness, rage, violence, anger, hate. Mm-hmm. And to me, faith was just allowing love back into my system. Like, why should that bother you if that's what it did for me? I don't go around, preaching with a Bible in my hand, but it just allowed me to let light and love back in, which I was so lacking.
Same here, because I grew up in a house that didn't have love. That house that I lived in, I call it the house of horrors. Love was never spoken. There was never a kind word spoken. I don't even think my birth mother called me by my first name my whole life. She used to refer to us as little whores and little sluts. And
really?
Yeah, oh yeah, like really. And that's a whole nother, the psychological damage, because every little kid just wants to be loved and accepted by their mother. I remember once accidentally waking her up from a nap to kiss her goodbye because I was going to school, and I accidentally knocked the glasses off of her face. She had fallen asleep with her glasses on her face, and it startled her, and she got angry, and she started screaming at me, like, "Get the F out of this room, you stupid effing, whatever." And she said, "The sight of you sickens me. I should have aborted you the minute I found out I was pregnant with you." And I didn't know what aborted meant, but I just knew my mother hated me. This little girl, this little 6-year-old girl just felt so much hate. I'm very fortunate and blessed that, and again, I think this was God. Just before my grandmother got custody of me, the abuse in the house was so bad that I contemplated ending my life. I don't know if I told you that. I figured out like when I was going to do it, how I was going to do it. The pain was so much, and the darkness of that house and the abuse was just too much. I didn't want to be in this place anymore. And I never told anyone what I was going to do, when, how, any of that. And there was an incident that took place in my mother's house where her husband beat me to unconsciousness. And I had like bruises across my throat, and I had a fat lip, and he had knocked me unconscious, and I was laying on the floor. And when I came to, and I feared this man like I can't even tell you. The mention of his name would make me shake. And I remember waking up, and I don't know where I got the courage, but I swear it was God. And I crawled underneath the kitchen table because the two of them were going at it, yelling, and she was pushing him and he was pushing her back. And I ran out that back door, and we happened to be living 2 doors up from my grandmother. And I ran to my grandmother's house, and she opened the door, and there I stood with the bruises and the blood. And she said, and she used to always ask me, "What's going on over there?" And I would say nothing, because that's what we were told to do. And that day I spilled my guts. And I said, Al beat the crap out of me. And she's like, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "I want you to call the police." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." And he came around the corner, and he grabbed me by the shirt, and I got out of that shirt so fast. He stood there holding my shirt, and I stood there with no shirt on. That's how fast I got away. And she, without hesitation, she grabbed a wooden hanger off of her coat rack and cracked him across the forearm and slammed the door in his face and goes, "Call the cops." So we called the police, and Officer Cuss came. I remember everybody's name. He was a New York State trooper, came in. I told him the whole story. He said, "Get in the backseat of my car." And I'm like, oh my God, he's listening to me. He hears me. He sees me. I think I was 11 years old. And my grandmother came out and she's like, where are you taking my granddaughter? He said, I'm taking her over to Judge Cody's house. It was a Friday night and the courts were closed. It was late. It was like, 6 or 7 o'clock at night. So we drove over to Judge Cody's house and Judge Cody came out and he looked like Santa Claus. He had a big long white beard with glasses and hair. And he knelt down by me and put his arm around me and he said, this piece of paper is going to protect you. And he said, it's an order of protection. Do you know what that is? And I said, no. And he told me what it was. And then he asked his wife to go get me a plate of food because they were having a cookout. And he said, we're going to go get your sister too. So the officer Cuss came to my mother's door and said, I want the other child. Took us both over to my grandmother's house and we had to go to court that Monday morning. He said, Judge Cody said, you're going to see my good friend Pete on Monday. And it was Judge Peter Kolakowski. And he said, and you're going to go tell him what's been happening to you. And so we went in front of Judge Kolakowski and he awarded custody to my grandmother. And we had 30 days with my grandmother. And in that 30 days, they interviewed school nurses, school teachers, and they said their grades have come up. They don't have dark circles under their eyes. They've gained weight. They're doing really well. So then we went back to court in 30 days, and the judge granted full custody to my biological mother's mother. And that really, I really truly believe that was God stepping in because I don't think I would be here. And I never told anybody about my plans to end my life. And now I'm so grateful that I got to be here and that God stepped in to intervene to give me a different life.
I had such a horrible feeling when you were saying the trooper put you in the car, and I'm thinking he's either going to take you back to your mother or I thought you were going to say he went and did something.
No.
But instead, he did the right thing.
He did.
I was just waiting for the ball to drop.
And I've never forgotten that. And the other thing that really saved me through all of this was I had amazing people that God put in my path. I had my school nurse who came to me every single day and asked me what's going on at home. Like she would shake me and just say, tell me, because she knew. And I was scared to tell her anything. We're good. So my school nurse, I had 2 teachers in the 5th grade, Mrs. Midoff and Miss Sexton, who became like big sisters to me. I'm still very close to Mrs. Midoff today. Joni has since passed away, but I feel like she's my guardian angel that watches over me, and she protected me as a little girl. She used to take me over to her house on the weekends, and she instilled in me, like, you can be anything you want to be. You can do anything you want to do, and anything good that you see in me is because of those people. My neighbor, Sylvester Donnellan, the Fermani family that always let me come over and had an extra chair at the table for me. All of those people played a very important part in my life. They were all my guardian angels here on earth. I would have never been able to. My Aunt Nancy, I wouldn't have never made it this far without them.
So let's go forward to, you had open heart surgery, and this was an epiphany of your childhood. Everything came rushing back. Tell me that part.
In 2011, I was remarkably sick, and they were treating me for anxiety when in fact I needed open heart surgery. I was very, very sick, and I went to the hospital 4 times in 4 weeks and was sent home with a drug called Ativan, and my husband was told to get me a psychiatrist. I refused to leave the ER. I demanded that someone else take another look. They did. And what they discovered was the second doctor came in and did a simple blood test and found out that I was an end-stage class 4 heart failure and didn't have long to live. So they rushed me into an 8.5-hour surgery to save my life. In that surgery, they found out I had a valve issue with 2 valves, not one. A part of my heart had to be reconstructed because it was so badly damaged from getting the wrong heart valve in my second heart surgery. So after that surgery, because I had what I believe was a near-death experience, where when my heart stopped, I believe my soul went somewhere else, and I got a glimpse of what heaven is. And coming back, I was very different. I started having these strange dreams. I thought they were dreams. I had horrible, horrible anxiety. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, was constantly checking the doors, wouldn't drive my car, wouldn't go anywhere, wouldn't socialize. And I'm the social butterfly. And my husband came to me and said, I think you might need to go talk to someone. And I said, for what? And he said, I think you might have some PTSD. So I sought out a therapist. Sure enough, I had PTSD, and I started telling him about these weird dreams. And I remember my heart surgeon and his staff saying to me, are you having any strange dreams right now? And I said, oh yeah. And they said, do you want to talk about it? I said, oh no, because I didn't know what to make of it. And each one that came was worse than the one before. And they came so fast and furious. So I had this therapist, and I started telling him. And he said, tell me about these dreams. And I would tell him details that I probably would never have remembered in a normal dream. I could tell you what the day of the week it was. I could tell you what was on the TV that day. I could tell you what I was wearing. I could tell you about what was on the wallpaper. I could tell you about the hole in the tip of my sneaker. I could tell you what I ate that day. These strange details just came flooding into my brain, along with tremendous amounts of sexual abuse from my mother's husband. I was very triggered by smells, and what I was told by my therapist was that that's very common with PTSD. I can't tolerate the smell of alcohol in someone's breath with cigarettes. And I have a really hard time with BO, like if people have BO, because that's what my mother's husband smelled like. He smelled like BO, cigarettes, and alcohol. And I had my very first bad flashback right after a checkout. I had just gotten checked out at my heart surgeon's office. I was sitting on a bench waiting for my father-in-law to come pick us up with the car. It was 6 weeks after my heart surgery. And this homeless guy walked in front of me while I was sitting there joking around with my mother-in-law, happy as could be. The minute he walked in front of me, I started to tremble. I thought I was going to poop my pants right there. And as I sat on the bench, I thought I was going to throw up.
Why? Because you smelt them?
Because
BO, or?
Because it triggered a flashback. Immediately, the smell of him triggered something in me that went way back to my childhood. I couldn't even stand up. Like, my legs were shaking so badly. They put me in a wheelchair, and I said to my mother-in-law, I'm dying. You got to take me to the ER. I'm dying. They took me to the ER. We spent all day at the ER, and my mother-in-law said, but you just left the heart surgeon's office. You're fine. And I said, no, I'm not fine. They didn't find anything wrong with me. And that's when I realized something else was going on with me. And the therapist said that the smells are very triggering. So he said, Mischel, what you're telling me is...
Well, a panic attack, you don't know if you're having a heart attack or a panic attack.
And that's what it felt like. It felt like I was dying. It literally felt like I was dying. And then I remember the therapist saying to me, these aren't dreams that you're having and that you're remembering during waking hours, Mischel. You know what this is, right? And I'm like, no, because I didn't. He said, you're having flashbacks, and we need to explore that. We need to talk about that. And thank God I found him when I did, because I literally, Clark, I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. When those memories started to flood my brain, I could not function. I had trouble brushing my teeth. I had trouble putting my hair up in the morning. I had trouble showering and getting on with my day. They were paralyzing thoughts of the things that had happened to me that would make me sick to my stomach. And literally, I was frozen and couldn't do anything, couldn't think clearly, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. It was unraveling so fast. I couldn't make sense of it, and I felt like I was drowning. And so I had drowning. I felt like I was drowning.
Because I've described when I got locked up, the mountain of weight on me, of trauma, was drowning me. And I literally was in my cell gasping for air, like I was sucking in water, like same exact thing.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. I felt like I was underwater, and I just couldn't get to the surface. And it was so frightening. And I remember saying to my therapist, I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. I don't think I'm going to hurt myself, but I'm so scared of being, like, I would go to the bathroom with the door cracked part of the way. Like, I wouldn't shut or lock any door in my own house, where I was so safe in my own house. I wouldn't go anywhere without someone. I had this overwhelming fear, like the boogeyman was just going to come out and do something to me or attack me, and I don't even know where those thoughts came from, but that's what I was feeling in that moment. But I went through all of that therapy. I started reading some great books. One of the books that I always refer everybody to is The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
Great book. Another person that I follow and that I love is Dr. Daniel Amen. I got to meet him when I was a guest on the Dr. Oz show, and he wrote a book called Your Mind is Always Listening. And his wife, I believe, is a child abuse survivor. And so
I just want to interrupt. You know, when we had done the pre-interview, you had talked to me about, like one of the many, many, visions that was coming back to you. And you said at 6, this lurch,
Yep. This is me. This is me.
That's you at 6?
At 6 years old. Yep. And that was the day, I always say, that's the day that my life changed forever. And for the longest time, I couldn't look at this picture. I couldn't look at her.
And you had said Al was having sex with you at 6, and your mother walked in the room. Yeah,
he was forcing me to have oral sex on him, yes. And I remember her coming, like standing in the doorway. She was drinking a cup of coffee. She had her nightgown on, and she walked by the room and then looked in at us. And I remember looking at her like help me. And her turning away and sipping her coffee and just walking down the hall and leaving me there.
That's a level of depravity that it's just tough to even fathom.
I can't tell you.
Yeah,
I can't tell you.
It's unbelievable.
I can't tell you how, when I think about that, the rage that I feel inside of me about that. It's so many people, when I tell, like my husband, my close friends that I've told this to, they find it so hard to believe that that I'm such a loving person and came from that.
From that, right. Yeah, it's, look, the abuser holds all of the weight for what they've done. But there's always people that know. And your mother knew. And she's witnessing it. Yeah. And she's turning a blind eye to it.
Yep.
It's just unfathomable.
Yep. And I'm going to tell you something. I look back on my life now, and I'm pretty sure if the neighbors knew, then my family knew. So in my opinion, this is just me. Anybody that knew back then and did nothing and turned a blind eye to it, in my book, doesn't deserve a space in my life. And I made the decision many years ago to walk away from my biological family, who are so dysfunctional and toxic. And I've also recently learned, because I kept saying, that when I came out to my mother about what had happened to me after my heart surgery, and these memories were just horrible. And it was always of him forcing me to have oral sex with him in different rooms of the house. And I'm thinking to myself, people said, where was your mother? I'm like, she was right there. She was right there. She was right there and looked the other way. She'd be right there when he would rub himself against us and do nothing. I would have taken a 2x4 or a frying pan against the back of that man's head if he ever did that to one of my kids.
Of course.
And I remember, this is the other thing I want to share too. I never could understand how or why I blocked these memories out. And I shared this with you in our conversation. And it's ironic that we're coming up on the Easter season right now, because there's so much that it goes into that. And every year when it's Easter, there's this commercial that comes on the TV, and it's the Cadbury commercial with the Easter bunny that goes, buck, 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 buck. You know it's Easter when the Easter bunny's back, blah, blah, blah. I hated that commercial. I couldn't stand it. It made my skin crawl, and I never knew why. And one of my flashbacks, I remembered an incident that took place with Al, with Lurch. And it was, he had just molested me. He had just had me in his room, forcing me to have oral sex with him. At this time, I was probably, it was just before my grandmother got custody. So I was probably like 10 or 11. And we went outside the back steps, and he was saying it was all my fault. I had asked for it. What a horrible person I was to make him do that. I had better not ever tell anybody, because I was going to be horribly punished. They were going to send me away. You think it's bad here, they're going to send you to someplace worse. You're never going to see your sister again. You're never going to see your mother again. You're never going to see your grandmother or any of your cousins again. And the whole time he's talking to me, we had baby bunnies and baby chickens. And he was holding this baby bunny in the crook of his elbow across his chest and petting it and telling me all these horrible things about myself. And he's like, you follow me? You follow me? You understand what I'm saying? You follow me? And I just, without hesitation, just nodded. And And I have a lot of problems with making eye contact with people. I don't know if you noticed that about me. And it comes from my child abuse, because there were times when he was abusing me that he'd make me look right at him in the face. And then there were other times that he'd make me look away. So I never knew what to do. I never knew where to look. And I still struggle with that. But I remember him making me look at him in the face that day when he was telling me this, if I ever told anybody what was going to happen to me. And then at the end of what he said, after he said to me, do you follow me? And I nodded yes. He took the bunny out of the crook of his arm and ripped the bunny's head off in front of me. And I just remember being so traumatized by that, because everybody loves a little soft bunny, and you just killed it in front of me. And I mean, he had blood on his sleeve, he had blood on his arm, he had blood on his hands. And then he walked over to the hedge bush and just threw it in the hedge bush, brushed his hands off and said, "Okay, get your ass in the house." And so I now realize that the subliminal message that was sent to me is, if you ever tell anybody, this is what I'm going to do to you. I also remember him taking me and my sister down in the basement. We had a cat named Snoopy, and she had a litter of kittens, and he made us stand there and watch him drown all the kittens. And I never understood why he was doing it back then. I remember I kept looking away, and he kept saying, look over here, don't take your eyes off there. If you take your eyes off of here, he's like, I'm going to give you this. And he'd hold his hand or his fist up. And I realize now that was him grooming us. That was part of his grooming of making us fearful, making us afraid, so that we would never say anything. And I think there's a lot of people who are in situations like that, who maybe have been told this is all your fault, or that they feel that there's somehow something wrong with them, that they called this upon themselves. I'm here to tell you, don't believe the lies. Those are all lies, and I'm here to tell you, don't believe the lies. Those are all lies told by a predator. What happened to us is not our fault. We are not the sum of the horrible things that have happened to us. We are so much more. And being a victim of child abuse stole so much from us already. Don't let it steal anything more from you. It will steal your joy. It'll steal your happiness. It'll steal your peace. And you can restore all of those things if you stop letting it have the power that it does. And we all have the power inside of ourselves to take it back, to take back that power, and to live a fulfilled and happy life. Yeah, it happened to us, but we are better, braver, and stronger. And I think that we are able to help each other navigate through these very difficult waters of healing. But I think it's all doable. We can do it.
You know, a superhero and a villain are born out of the same trauma. And the villain ends up saying, what was done with me was so horrible, I'm going to make the world pay. And then the superhero says, what was done to me was so horrible, I'm going to make sure nobody else experiences that. And, I think most of us after the abuse become the villain. Just the way we live our lives, the way we treat ourselves. It's just a metaphor, but we can all become the superhero. And that's what you and I are trying to do now. And by speaking out, it's that person who feels like the villain, hates life, hates themselves.
Don't feel you deserve anything. Like, I didn't feel like I deserved anything. I felt like what I got was what I deserved. I was tainted property. I was damaged goods. No.
So you have all these memories. You see a therapist. Mm-hmm. What's the rest of the process that you did to heal? And to get past, you're racked with anxiety. You can't brush your teeth hardly. Yeah. You look like crap.
Yeah. And I just didn't. This is what I feel like. I feel like we're all born with a flame inside of us, and it's a powerful flame, and we're born with it. And then in our situation, when we've been sexually abused, someone comes along and extinguishes that flame, right? There's an ember still there. Everybody that's out there that's listening, you still have that ember. Don't think for a second you don't. You got to ignite it. You got to, and that's what you did for me. You ignited the flame that I was born with, and you allowed me to see that I have the power within me to make this better. And if there's one person out there that's listening today that I've somehow reached, then this was all worth it, right? And I feel like so then what I did was after I went through therapy with my first therapist, he retired, and I was reading the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and listening to a podcast with Dr. Daniel Amen. And I suddenly realized that, wait a minute, I think I need trauma therapy because this is traumatic on every level. So I sought out a trauma therapist, and I've been working with her now for the past few years. And I feel like it's kicked it up to a whole nother level. Behaviors that I had, like my triggers, getting upset and the anger stuff that would come out of nowhere, I am able to process better. Things that have helped me are things like tapping. I do tapping, breathing work, Pilates has always helped me. Believe it or not, putting on my pajamas and dancing around to 80s music in my house and baking is another therapy thing for me. I love to bake and I love to give it away. So find whatever it is. Find your mantra. For me, my mantra is speak life. Constantly speak life into your life. I feel like I have, in my house, I have all these little signs all over the house that tell me that I am worthy, that I am worthy of healing, that I'm worthy of better. And all of these phrases from like all the scripture from the Bible, all of those things comfort me and heal me in ways I can't even explain to you. Connecting with people like this, connecting with other survivors, because nobody's going to get it like another survivor. Right. Each of our stories is different. Each of our stories are compelling, and each of our stories are painful. But no one's going to get it like someone who's walked in your shoes. And so for me, that's how I've moved forward. And that's what I intend to do. I intend to continue to do this. My goal here, sharing this story, is I have always been an advocate for women in heart disease. I've always been an advocate for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which I have. And I've always been an advocate for dysautonomia or neuropathic POTS, because it's another condition that I suffer from. But I've taken the choice, and I've taken the bull by the horns today. I want to be more of an advocate for this, for childhood sexual trauma, because each one teach one. I think iron sharpens iron. Right. And I feel like we can do that for each other. And the more we do that, the more people are going to be able to heal. They're going to feel safer to heal. They're going to feel like it's okay to say their truth, whatever, no matter how ugly or dark it is. And they're going to be able to see that they're going to find peace here. They're going to find hope here, and they're going to find love here from each of us. I love sometimes when you do your videos, you'll say peace and you'll say, I love you, because you don't know how many people out there need to hear that. The fact that you say the words peace, because that's what you want to put that out there. And I think we can speak into fruition certain things. For me, I used to always talk negatively about myself. I don't do that anymore. That's why I always say speak life into your life. And that's what I continue to do. And I want to do that for others. And I want others to step up and do that for themselves.
Do you have a morning routine?
Always with prayer. Always start my morning with prayer. I always have a conversation with God in the morning. Or as soon as I get to my car and I'm driving somewhere, I drive my car. It sounds corny, but it's true. Like he's sitting in the seat right next to me. And I talk to him just like I'm talking to you right now. I pray that he will heal the things in me that I'm still struggling with. I pray that he will fill me with more of him and less of me. I thank him for how far I've come, and I thank him because I can look back on my life and see his hand was on me every step of the way. Some people will say to me, aren't you angry at God that this happened to you? God didn't do that to me.
Right. I mean, that's what I thought too.
Yeah.
That's how I went through life.
Yeah. God didn't do that to me. That's the world. That is the world. And each soul is born with free will, right?
Correct.
So I don't blame God for that. God delivered me from it. God got me the hell out of there. And every step of the way, God has had his hand on me, showing me a different and a better way. Anything good that you see in me came from all of those angels that surrounded me with love and support as a little girl. I never would have made it this far without them. And then as an adult, finding my therapist, finding the books, finding you, finding other survivors, that's what's keeping me rolling.
Right. People will say to me all the time, make comments on podcasts I've done, like, your story is just proof that there is no God. And it's if you're about to have a car crash and God interjects and buffers your car from the next one, or if there's going to be a robbery on the city street with a gun and the person's going to get shot and God interjects and stops that from happening. If God interjects every tragedy, like we want God to be the superhero, you know, from the movies, then we're just puppets on God's string, which what kind of life is that? And that's what I try to tell people. I'm like, then we're just puppets on a string. So we have free will, and I could use mine for good. You can use yours for good. And the third person can use theirs for evil. And something bad could happen to us if we cross paths with them. And that's, once I got that notion of the free will, it allowed all my anger towards God to dissipate. And then I could let, you know, love back into my heart, which was so lacking.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so that's why I try to get across to people, you know.
There is so much healing in love, and it's hard because when you've been abused by somebody, I read recently that the worst kind of abuse is from the people that are supposed to protect you, or in your own household. It's hard to trust anybody. It's hard to open your heart or yourself up to anybody because you're always waiting for that other shoe to drop or something bad to happen. And also, it's those thoughts, those conversations that we have with ourselves where we tell ourselves we're not worthy. The conversation you have with yourself is the most important conversation you will ever have in your life. Start being kind to yourself. Start speaking kindly to yourself, no matter how bad your circumstance is. And your thought process will begin to change. I would encourage anybody that's out there that's still struggling to reach out to you, to write a letter, get on here, speak their truth. If they can't get here, if they're too far away, sign up for your Facebook, sign up for other ways, because that community, it's not just what you're posting and saying, it's the stuff that we're saying to each other too. That I read all the comments that people leave you, by the way, and some of them I respond to, but all of them there's healing in all of them. If you just take a moment to read each one of them, you've got a great community. I got to tell you, I've read a lot of the things that they've written, and I realized that there's a lot of hurting souls out there.
You know, another popular thing people like to comment on, besides the God thing, is I know that if this happened to me, I would have gone running right to my father and told him what happened.
Yeah.
You know, I can't believe you kept your mouth shut. It just makes zero sense. All right. So let's take my situation and put it over here. And now let's use your situation where it's in the household on a daily basis. The mother's complacent. Now what, hotshot, who knows what they would do exactly? You're dealing with this every single day from a young child on. Where are you supposed to turn? You're getting animals killed and tortured in front of you. You're basically living with monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And these people think they know what they would have done.
Yeah.
What would you really have done now? You know, it's an impossible situation.
Yeah. And there's so many things I look back on that I was exposed to, that I realized, and one of the things I read in Dr. Amen's book was, when you're exposed to trauma, our brains are wired differently. And I didn't realize just coming home to my house and having no food or having no electricity is also traumatic to a little 5 or 6-year-old child. The fist fights that him and my mom would get into, and when he'd get in one of his drunken binges, like, that's traumatic. The constant daily physical beatings was traumatic. All of that. I never realized some of my behaviors were deeply rooted in my childhood and what I had been exposed to. I recently found out that there were other members in our family. I just found out last summer that Al Lurch, who had passed away, it just came out at a funeral, that he had molested his grandchildren. And I knew my sister and I were not his only victims. I'm sure there's more that are out there. I also found out that one of his grandchildren is serving time in prison for raping a 10-year-old child.
Wow.
Yeah, so it runs deep and wide in that family. And sadly, the statistics also say that it runs through generations. It can run through families. So the more you don't say anything, the more you're allowing it to continue.
Right. it's an amazing, I just so proud of you. Like, you know, like you hear something like this, and for the person not to be sitting in the corner, sucking their thumb, you know, blubbering like an idiot, it's unbelievable. The healing that can occur, the strength, the courage that we have within us that we just have to tap into. Is there anything you'd like to promote? You know, where, you know, are you involved in anything? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, yeah. I'm on Facebook. You can look me up under Mischel Jean, if you want to reach out. And if you're someone who
you spell Mischel M-I-S-C-H-E-L.
Yep, M-I-S like Sam, C-H-E-L, and it's Jean, which is my middle name. And if you send me a friend request and a message, and you put the "free like me" words in there, I'll know that you came to me through here, and I'm happy to be here and to encourage you and pray for you in any way that you need me. I have a Facebook page. I have an Instagram where I do a lot of my cooking. You can find me. I think it's MISHS19 on Instagram. I'm really I'm a foodie. So that's kind of how I express myself too, is through food. I do a lot of gluten-free organic stuff. I'm always trying to do stuff with the American Heart Association and women in heart disease. So, yeah, you could always find me there too.
I'm honored that you came on here, and I'm so glad you broke your silence.
Me too. I want to say these words. My name is Mischel, and I'm free.
Yes,
I'm free. Yep. Did everybody see my shirt today? I had this made for today.
Now that is a guest, and she also brought me this beautiful gift up here to start my podcast off.
Yep, we made history today.
Awesome.
We're making it count. And I want to thank you for everything that you're doing, and I want to send all kinds of love and prayer out to everybody out there that's listening. You're not alone. And Clark's here to help you. I always tell him he's the beacon of light that's lighting the path for us. It's a dark subject, and it's not one that people like to discuss. But the more we discuss it, the less dark it becomes. So we got this. We can do this.
Awesome. Thank you, Mischel.
Thank you.
There you have it, everybody. Mischel, an awesome story of survival. Tune in next week. We'll have another great episode. Peace, everybody.